Hi guys, Mr. P's here. This week we're looking at Othello as a protagonist, but we're focusing more on the notion of race and how it's explored and presented within the play, but also how people have responded to Othello and his race historically itself. Okay, so first of all, let's do the retrieval tasks. So what I'd like you to do is try not to look at your notes if possible. Copy complete those quotes there, those 5 quotes. They're from the kind of 60 or so quotes that I've sent to you about a couple of months ago or so, really. What I do is fill in those blanks, see if you can recall it. Okay, number 1. The correct quote was, "The devil will make a grandsire of you." Iago speaking to Brabantio in Act 1, Scene 1. Number 2 is Othello, "My parts, my title, and my perfect soul shall manifest me rightly." We've got a sense of his hubristic arrogance that's there itself. Number 3, "O thou foul thief, where hast thou stowed my daughter?" Brabantio in his series of wild, hugely racist accusations towards Othello, who remains calm in spite of such provocations. Number 4, "I saw Othello's visage in his mind," says Desdemona in Act 1, Scene 3, justifying and explaining her love for Othello. And number 5, brilliant quote from one of Iago's soliloquies: "So will I turn her virtue into pitch, and out of her own goodness make the net that shall enmesh them all." Okay, hopefully you got most of them correct. Okay, retrieval now, more on what you did last week, which is all about the protagonist. So, answer those 5 questions. Okay, pause the video, answer the 5 questions. I'll go through them briefly in a few seconds, it'll seem. Okay, so number 1, how does he differ? Othello is not nobility or royalty, despite his role as a military general, so he differs from the classical tragic hero in that respect. Number 2, what do you think Aristotle means? An intermediate kind of personage. So the idea behind that is that the protagonist of a tragedy cannot be too morally perfect, because if he's too perfect, it's inaccessible, because he doesn't seem human really in many respects. Because we need to have a realistic character enduring a realistic struggle. So, next challenge was to summarize how Othello is regarded in Venice using both power and status in your response. So you could have written, whilst Othello is conferred power by Venice, he has no status because he is a marginalized outsider to European culture. So the idea is that Venice allows him to have power from a military perspective, but he has no status, so he has no standing or reputation or respect really, and within his peer group, so to speak, people within the hierarchy at his level above him. Number 4, what is Othello's hamartia? Jealousy, defining himself in racial terms set by the Venetians. So many choices depending on your critical standpoint, really. I'm more in line with the second one. A big flaw for Othello is his inability to not escape the racial stereotype and to become consumed and destroyed by it in many respects. Is a play still relevant today? Why? Well, yes, especially in light of the Black Lives Matter protests. The play offers a glimpse into the role of white privilege in perpetuating unfair and unjust power and superiority, whilst rendering Othello inferior and a mixed marriage unnatural. So there's huge issues that still exist today that have been absolutely encapsulated in the recent Black Lives Matter protests. So big questions regarding the protagonist and race. How significant is race in the play? How does Shakespeare present race in the play? And what have the critics said historically? In slight difference from last week, there's a much greater focus on critical views this week in a slightly more detailed way, particularly defining the difference between late 20th century to early 21st century views relative to the previous 300 years or so since the play's production. So how significant is race in the play? How does Shakespeare present race in the play? And what have the critics said historically? So, of course, there's this presumption here that you know the play well and you've been learning the quotes and reminding yourself of key quotes and themes. Yeah. So, first question: how significant is race in the play? Pause the video. Add your own 2 to 3 sentence response to this question, considering why you hold this opinion. Alright, so just to dip our toe in the water of what is a significant part of the play itself, what I'd like you to think about is the following kind of 7 statements, really. I'd like you to order those statements. So draw an arrow in your book or in your notes or whatever, most significant at the top, least significant at the bottom. And they're in a completely random order at the moment. What I'd like you to do is order them in the order of significance in their contribution to the play's tragic outcome, as in which of those 7 statements is most significant in contributing to the way the play ends as a tragedy. Okay? So order them from most significant to least significant. Okay, so now consider and look at your top 2. What I want you to think about is, why are they there? What is it that the play reveals that makes those the most significant factors in your eyes to the tragic outcome of the play? Within your paragraph, try and use the parameter Shakespeare offers a window into the world of for at least one sentence. So you could say Shakespeare offers a window into the world of severe racial prejudice, for example. So personally, if it was me, I would say that the 2 most significant factors in my eyes that contribute to the tragic outcome, one of them has to be, of course, Othello's race. It's hugely significant. But also, alongside that, is the fact that not just the fact that he's black, but that society has significant racial prejudice, the society in which the fictional Othello exists. Okay, so this essay, I've cited it twice really in this PowerPoint itself. It's brilliant. I'd recommend you read the whole thing. I've summarised a couple of key bits. I'm just conscious of time, but I recommend you read the whole thing. It's an excellent, and it will absolutely improve your understanding of the play. So Kieran Ryan, we've come across another quote from him before, but this article, which is in the British Library, Racism, Misogyny and Motiveless Morality in Othello, what he expressed is how Shakespeare produced in Othello a searing critique of racial and sexual injustice, which is more powerful now in the 21st century than it could ever been at the dawn of the 17th. Describing how Othello and Desdemona's mixed-race marriage is an act of free citizens of a truly civilized future in society. So the idea is that Shakespeare is aware of issues that exist and will continue to exist. When actually, what he says is that Othello and Desdemona are prisoners of a time when racial prejudice and sexual inequality are so ingrained that even their heroic hearts are tainted by them. So that's a big view. That's a big view. The big view, first of all, is that Ryan perceives Shakespeare to be offering a searing critique of racial and sexual injustice. The second big idea is that actually Othello and Desdemona are true and honest and free, and society isn't. So, pause the video. What do you think Ryan means when he describes Othello and Desdemona as prisoners? So what are they prisoners of? Okay, hopefully your answer there was something like injustice, severe racial prejudice, prisoners of closed minds when people should be more open. So, but also for Kieran Ryan, Othello's race and marriage, what it does, what the big part of the essay shows and indicates and justifies brilliantly, is that actually Othello's race and the mixed race marriage causes society to need to destroy them. Why does it do that? Because what is perceived there through the illicit marriage of Othello and Desdemona is the foundations upon which white male society is governed. It's rocked by the fact that people are not playing by the rules. So through Iago himself, who embodies the venomous rage of society, they're dealt with, eliminated, because they pose a threat to the white male Christian values that were prevalent within that time period itself. Okay, so moving on from Kieran Ryan, but again, that will make much more sense if we read the entire essay. It's a brilliant, brilliant essay and well worth reading. Georgina Singh, in her 1994 essay, Othello's Identity, Postcolonial Theory and Contemporary African Rewritings of Othello, she says similar ideas to Ryan in many respects, particularly that idea of Othello's heart becoming tainted by the racial prejudice. You know this quote. I've said this a lot because it's such an excellent quote. She states in the essay, Othello self-destructively internalizes the prevailing racism. And you know, we came for that to mean and understand it as Othello the character internalizes and increasingly embodies that racial stereotype that was prevalent within that era. And actually what that leads towards is absolutely self-destructive and destructive behaviour from Othello, which culminates in the violent murder of Desdemona, the female character whom he deeply loved early in the play and at other points in the play as well. So the key thing to note though is that for both of these critics, two very influential and significant views, we get a broad sense of modern literary critical responses. So the modern view we can summarise as the racial prejudice within Venetian society causes Othello to define himself in Venetian terms as inferior. That's important. The mixed-race marriage defies a racist and misogynistic society's norms, leading to a brutal reprisal from society to eliminate the perceived threat. That's also important. The challenge they pose needs repressing in white male European eyes. Iago is the manifestation of society's brutal destruction of the threat and the rage at its existence. So he becomes like the blunt instrument to kind of create harmony in society's eyes again by getting rid and eliminating the threat. Therefore, for many modern critics, race is central to the tragic outcome of the play. So pause the video here and summarise Ryan's and Singh's views on race in Othello, and try and do it in one sentence if possible. Okay, next question. How does Shakespeare present race in the play? I'm not going to go in detail into the text itself because we've done that. We've explored this a lot in lessons. What I want to remind you of is how we could argue, like Ryan has, Shakespeare arguably critiques society through the play, challenging audiences to reconsider their prejudiced views of race. Things I would say that are some but not all that we could note to support this view. We could look at the presentation of Othello in Act 1, Scene 2, defying the offensive depiction of him by Iago and Roderigo and Brabantio in Act 1, Scene 1. We could consider the Othello of Act 1 as noble, moral and eloquent. We could consider the fact that Othello speaks in blank verse and some of the finest poetry in the play. Shakespeare is the protagonist. Shakespeare makes Othello his protagonist. We could also consider the presentation of significant white male characters as deceitful, immoral and self-serving, to again further pose a challenge of what is good, what is evil, and challenge that stereotypical view that was quite widely held. And we could also consider the initial depiction of Othello and Desdemona as a natural and happy match. They are deeply in love and really happy early in the play. So what I'd like you to do is go through the play or go through that list of key quotes that I've sent on various homework so far and try and add at least 3 under each of the 6 headings. Okay. Act 1 establishes racial prejudice as a social norm. The play evokes a deeply patriarchal society. Othello internalizes a racial prejudice. Othello increasingly embodies the racial stereotype. Racism and misogyny aren't exclusive to Iago, and black and white imagery challenges societal norms. See what you would put in there to support that, okay? And consider that. Look at the quotes you've identified and write a paragraph summarising your view on how does Shakespeare present race in the play. Try and include a quote from Singh or Ryan and at least 2 quotes from the play itself, okay? Finally, this is a recap because we've done this, yeah, we've looked at this, but I want you to remember because it's significant. What have critics said historically? Pause, try and recall what the historical responses are to race and Othello. Okay, so I'm not going to go through this. I'm a bit lacking time, but look at the task at the bottom, okay? Answer that, think about that itself. From Thomas Rhymer all the way to F.R. Leavis. A real sense of ingrained racism. Okay. So, finally, a bit of reflection. How does the play Othello reflect issues raised across the recent Black Lives Matter protests? Where can you draw comparisons? What is being revealed about society through such comparisons? I think in many respects, the Black Lives Matter protests just encapsulate the issues that Shakespeare raises 450, 480 years before. It just shows the relevance of what Shakespeare is exploring. Further reading. I would absolutely recommend reading that top one. It's a brilliant, brilliant article. The next 2 are good and they will, again, further develop your understanding, okay? Alright guys, thanks for your attention. I look forward to seeing you in school soon. Really looking forward to seeing you guys. Of course, any questions about anything that's raised here, do drop me an email. Yeah. Cheers.